Okay, good morning, everybody. We will go ahead and get started. Welcome to our mCLASS Texas Literacy Screener training. My name is Natalie Flores, and I'm from the Texas Education Agency. I also have Scott here with me as well, and the Amplify team too. Our goal for this presentation is to help you develop best practices around using screeners such as mCLASS. We hope that after this training, mCLASS will feel like an easy-to-use, effective diagnostic tool that can help you inform your instruction. So let's review some housekeeping items as everyone settles in. You are welcome to just follow along in this training, and do note that we are recording it, so it will be available later on our data-driven instruction website, and we can give you the link to that as well in our chat. Let's see. So for some ease of communication, as you probably can tell, you are muted. We're going to have Scott join us for an explanation of essentially how GoToWebinar works in case you haven't used it before.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to give you a super quick tutorial on some of the functionality here. As you can see, this area to the right of the screen, this is what we call your control panel. And for you all, because you don't have a lot of the clutter that the organizers do, you just essentially have your audio and your questions in chat. So I wanted to very quickly show you how you can control some of these things. And can you go? So at the very top, just to the left of the control panel, there's this orange arrow, and you can use this to minimize and then re-maximize or re-expand, I should say, the control panel at any point in time throughout the presentation. It's not in the way all the time. So there is a microphone underneath it that should be orange the entire time. We are going to keep everyone muted, and we're going to use the questions chat box for communication purposes. If you happen to see that your microphone is green, just know that everybody on here can hear you. So maybe go and mute yourself, because you can change that yourself if you want to. And we are not going to be using the raise your hand function today. So the most important aspect of the control panel for you all is the questions chat box. So this is where, as we go through this presentation, if you have any questions at all, whether they're technical or content related, you can submit them here. As Natalie mentioned, we are joined by 3 members of the Amplify team. So as we go through and questions come up, I will pass along the questions to the relevant members of that team, who will be able to answer as many things as possible as we go. So we can't necessarily guarantee that we'll be able to keep up with everything, but we will document everything. So every question that is asked will be saved, and we'll look at that after the fact and see if we need to develop some FAQs. But as I mentioned, we will try to answer as many questions as we can as we go. So that's essentially the most important part for communication's sake for you all.
Thank you, Scott. And we just want to remind you all as well, because questions obviously will come up. mCLASS also has a lot of on-demand training videos available on their website, and we can insert those links for you as well in the chat box if you'd like. Some additional new features that I think, as a former teacher, you all will find really exciting is that they have some new general guidance for DIPLS 8. There's also some exciting remote alternative assessments that are available for grades 1 and up. The mCLASS home activities are really wonderful. They seem very robust and are certainly going to support teachers in connecting children's learning at home with what's going to be happening at school. And of course, they also have some remote instruction guides, meaning how this all looks like if it is to be done remotely. So again, you can find more information specifically on remote administration at remotemclass.amplify.com. Great. And just so you guys know, in case you are still kind of on the fence and not sure which screening tool you're going to decide to use, Texkia also has some remote screening webinars coming up along with TPRI Tejas Lay. You can register on their website. Some of their additional new features are talking to children about COVID, supporting your virtual classroom, using family observation forms, essentially thinking of our families as data collectors for us. And they also have some really robust home learning activities just based on the data that you collect within the platform as well. So definitely check those out if you are still kind of trying to make your decision. So today's session objectives center around two main goals. Our first goal is supporting teacher understanding of best practices, and our second goal will be partnering with mCLASS to show you how to access and use their platform. This includes spending time discussing on how to administer the literacy screener, and at the end, we will look at all the resources available within their platform and finish by letting you know about some single topic webinars that'll be available starting in September. So these webinars will also provide you with educational videos for you to access throughout the year as they relate to using data-driven instruction in early childhood education. So here's the agenda for today. As you can see, it will focus on pretty much three main areas, which is why screening students is so important, how to administer the screener, and what resources are available to use once the data is gathered. But for now, we're just going to kind of focus on the why we screen children in general. Like playtime, meals, and nurture, data in the early grades will transform a child's educational journey. As many of you know, our youngest learners come to us full of potential and eagerness. They come to us needing food, play, and love to grow, as well as a teacher that understands their strengths and needs. While it's our responsibility to support our young students in meeting goals and standards, it's important to remember that we too have standards to meet. Being an educator means continually growing our practice to meet professional, research-based goals. This standard was taken from the NAEYC Professional Standards and Competencies for Early Childhood Educator Handbook. It reads, early childhood educators understand that child observation, documentation, and other forms of assessment are essential to the practice of all early childhood professionals. They understand that effective, evidence-based teaching is informed by thoughtful, ongoing, systematic observation and documentation of each child's learning progress, qualities, strengths, interests, and needs. So we hope that you're able to share this meaningful quote with your teaching team come the start of school, just to remind ourselves of why it's so important that we engage in assessment practices. For a moment, let's envision the exponential growth our students could gain if one tool could help us with the following: collecting accurate data about our students that can be used to immediately inform instruction, gathering data from families which can help us paint a whole image of the child across settings such as home and school, and help us plan interventions based on collected data to close learning gaps. To realize this vision of exponential growth, it's important that we use high-quality tools to support our practice. That said, given the uncertainties of the school disruptions in our upcoming 2020-2021 school year, it's now more important than ever that educators have a reliable, multidimensional assessment tool to support their practice, one that provides accurate, meaningful information, and one that can help teachers communicate effectively with families. It's also important to note that mCLASS as well as Dyslexia are currently unveiling ways to address issues of remote screening, so keep that in mind as you view the presentation. So before we jump completely into mCLASS, we do want to chat a little bit about what data-driven instruction is and how to really implement that into your practice in a meaningful way. So we're going to move on to exploring how to use collected data to drive your instruction. And another way to phrase this is obviously data-driven instruction. Here's an example of an activity that you can try with your teaching team later or yourself just to get you thinking about data-driven instruction. You can just take a minute to think about some items that you assess daily in your own life. So for example, I consider weight every day as a part of my assessment practice. I weigh myself every morning, but obviously if I do nothing with that data by making a plan or intervening with different menus, the scale number doesn't change. But if I do adjust what I eat and how I exercise, my outcome is different. I use the scale as information to then make informed decisions to get me closer to my goal. This is an example of using data to drive your informed decisions. Another example is that I measure the amount of gas in my tank. Once I fill up my tank, my assessment isn't finished. I continue to check on my gas levels regularly so that I don't run out. So let's think about some other professions that we rely on every day to gather and use meaningful data. Some examples are doctors, who check symptoms while also listening to the patient to gather formative data. Grocers who must make sure produce and sell-by dates are all fresh. I'm sure we all choose a milk carton by the sell-by date. Again, these are all examples of using data to inform decisions. Mechanics must also listen. They check and then act to make sure they fix any problem we make with our cars. So it's important to remember that stakeholders in education expect our profession to gather and use data to assist children in growing and learning. This does not mean we only practice assessment once or twice a year. It means continually collecting data to adjust instruction in meaningful ways. As we embark on learning about mCLASS as a particular tool, we're also going to provide some information and opportunities for you to understand the importance of accurate data and how to use it to meet students where they are so that their skills will improve. The term data-driven instruction refers to when educators use information collected from screeners and other assessments to make informed decisions about how to adjust their instruction. Keep in mind, data collected outside of screeners can also be used to inform instruction, such as collecting data on student interests. For example, you can think to yourself, what are my students' favorite outdoor activities right now? Or, do my students have a favorite movie in common? Throughout this presentation, consider how you can use those interest-driven data points to inform your instruction as well. So let's take a brief moment to just kind of step back a little bit and prepare ourselves for a stop and jot where we quickly write down our thoughts. Or if you don't have a pen and paper available, you can at least consider them. We've been using the term data a lot in this presentation already and will continue to do so. But for now, let's pause and reflect on what data actually is and how it's meaningful to you. As previously noted, the term data refers to information collected. More specifically, in this presentation, data means the information you've collected by using an assessment tool, such as mCLASS. So let's take about a couple of seconds just to reflect on what data you find most meaningful to your practice. It can be data collected from screeners, such as mCLASS, or maybe parent questionnaires. Student work samples are always really great points of data, observations you make in the classroom as well. And as you reflect and perhaps even write these down, you can consider what data, meaningful data, looks like to you and why it's so important. So we'll come together in a few seconds after you've thought about it. And if you're sharing this video later with your teaching team, you can also feel free to pause at this point as well. And for those of you who would like to share, you can also use the comments, questions chat as well to kind of let us know about what kind of data you find most meaningful and important to your instruction. All right, so let's move ahead. Now that we've considered what highly meaningful data looks like, at least internally with ourselves, and why it's important, let's apply those thoughts to the data cycle. The data cycle is a helpful way to visualize how data is collected, analyzed, interpreted, and implemented. While we consider how to use data to drive instruction, it's best to use a cycle such as this one to guide our practices. And for those of you participating in reading academies, this cycle may also look very familiar as it is used there as well. Let's view the data cycle and its components together. As you view the data cycle, note there are 4 stages within it when used in conjunction with assessment results. Stage 1 asks us to collect data that measures student performance or mastery of objectives. Stage 2 asks us to analyze data from those results. In other words, how are you making meaning of it? Stage 3 asks us to interpret the data to inform instruction so that it supports student success. Another way to think about this is considering what your next steps might be before actually implementing them into your instruction. And then stage 4 asks us to plan and implement that instruction so that it meets the needs of your students. So as you can see, the data cycle is an iterative process, meaning that we go through it from beginning to end over and over again. We can move through the data cycle in a moment's time to make quick decisions, or move through it much slower as we pause and reflect on which steps should be taken next. Here's an example of how you can track your movement through the data cycle on your own. You can simply write down these 4 stages, or we can provide you with a blank data cycle diagram as well. As you practice this with your teaching team later or on your own, you can remember to take a moment and reflect on which type of data you want to analyze. Will it be from screening results or some observations that you've made? I'm going to provide a quick example for you of how I moved through the data cycle one particular day while I was teaching. One day, during center time in my kindergarten classroom, I had noticed one student in particular was moving through a CVC card game rather quickly and efficiently. His goal was to match the word from a deck of cards to the picture shown, and then he was instructed to write the word down. First, I noticed he was very successful when using the IP word family cards. He had successfully matched the words to the images. He also wrote it down for himself. If I was moving through the data cycle, this would be an example of me being in stage 1, collecting data, which is the green stage. Simply put, my observation was the collected data. And by the way, you can also kind of follow along the data cycle. It is located on the top right corner of the slide as well. To set myself up to move to stage 2, which is the red stage, which is analyzing data, I thought to myself, this child must have experience with using CVC words. He hasn't gotten one wrong yet. There I was, making meaning of my observation. Then in stage 3, the yellow stage, I considered how I might challenge this student. I thought to myself, I wonder if they're ready for letter blends. In stage 4, which is the blue stage, I planned and implemented, meaning I brought out the letter blend cards to use with the CVC word deck. From there, I noticed that the student was very familiar with the SH word blend. However, they were not as familiar with the DR blend. So I hope that example was helpful. Now you'll feel prepared to move through the data cycle stages as you reflect on a moment similar to mine. And like I said earlier, this can happen very quickly, or it can happen a lot slower as we stop to collect more data. So just a reminder, this activity, is available to you. We will have this recorded video set up on our website if you want to go through this with your teaching team or with yourself at a later time. So we're going to pause and just take a moment to see if there's any questions or comments that came up in the chat. Scott, do you see anything that's come up so far that we can address as a group?
There are no new questions that have popped up.
Okay. Well, feel free to keep adding them, guys. We're going to move along, and before we totally jump into mCLASS, we are going to review HB3. So we're going to quickly look at the background for the change in our diagnostic tools for kindergarten and why it's so important. As I'm sure you know, mCLASS and Dyslexia are the 2 tools that the Commissioner has named to meet the statute requirement. Obviously, today's presentation is focusing just on mCLASS. HB3 requires that all kindergarten students be administered a literacy screener during the beginning of the year assessment. HB3 also requires that LEAs notify parents of results in writing within 60 days of administering the literacy tool. There are other requirements for kindergarten surrounding PEIMS submission for the Early Reading Indicator Code and Dyslexia Code in PEIMS. The Early Reading Indicator Code is entered twice, once in the fall and then in the summer. The dyslexia screener is required to be administered by the end of year for all kindergarten students. The dyslexia code in PEIMS is entered during the summer submission window. Each local education agency is responsible for setting and communicating the annual BOI, MOI, and EOI assessment windows. Holidays, parent-teacher conference days, and other campus events need to be taken into consideration while scheduling these. Emphasizing the importance of formative diagnostic practices throughout the year to emphasizing the importance of formative diagnostic practices throughout the year to teachers is key to understanding their overall role of using data to inform instruction. The PEIMS and ECDS submissions should also be taken into consideration. But for a moment, let's consider some best practices too that will inform instruction continuously so that students are receiving appropriate interventions and support that are needed to close any learning gaps. During the beginning of the year, other domains need to be administered, as well as formative data collected to have a complete picture of the whole child. Middle of the year is a great checkpoint to see if students in that monitor range have made any gains toward being on track, as well as students that are in need of other support. Teachers can gather and look at data to measure if they are making progress, as well as closing any learning gaps. Again, formative data from classroom activities will complete the picture of the whole child. This process is continuous and important, even throughout the end of the year as well. So let's get ready to preview mCLASS with their team. Remember, an effective literacy screener provides real-time information that identifies students' strengths and needs to inform instruction and close any learning gaps. And Alan and Karen, I will now give this over to you.
Hi, everybody. This is Alan Stantnauer from the Amplify team. Let me just share my screen. Okay, there we go. All right, so again, this is Alan Stantnauer. I'm with Amplify on the mCLASS team, and I'm joined here today by Karen Moss, also from Amplify, who is one of the leads of our PD team. And we're going to walk you through the big ideas around mCLASS and actually show you what it feels like to assess, what it feels like to assess remotely, and then how you look at the data in the reporting system, get instant groupings, instruction, and get ready for your Home Connect letters and how to think about progress monitoring. So if you could do us a favor before we start jumping into this, take a look at your chat box and let us know a little bit about who you are. Of course, ask us lots of questions. While I'm speaking, Karen will be answering, and then vice versa. But if you could go to your chat box and just let us know who you are. What's your name? Where are you coming from? If you're a teacher, what grade you're teaching. If your district is still deciding about whether or not to use mCLASS or to use Texas Kia, you can mark that over in the chat box as well, and we'll make sure to be here to support you. So with that, let's give it a go. So the first thing that I want to introduce you to is our online course. We're going to be taking a look at mCLASS from a fairly high level so that you can really orient yourself to what it's like to assess either in person or remotely, what it's like to look at that data. But of course, you're going to be curious domain by domain. What are the scoring rules? What's the method? How do I practice this? How do I get videos and recordings of what it's like for a child to do these measures so you can practice your own scoring? For that, you have an online course. Your district is going to give you the link to the online course. As soon as you have that link from your district, once they're set up in the system, you'll then be able to create your PD account. The PD account doesn't have to be the same as your mCLASS account. That's up to you, but this is how you can learn it. We do offer districts fully facilitated PD sessions for sale. So you might have that opportunity, in addition to this webinar, to be able to go to a fully facilitated, of course, remote, but highly interactive session. Now, the heart of mCLASS is two core assessments that were developed at the University of Oregon. For all of your English measures, you'll be using DIBELS 8th edition. DIBELS is the Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. It's been around since the late 90s. Some of you may have even once upon a time used DIBELS on a Palm Pilot from Wireless Generation, which is us. Or you may have used TPRI on a Palm Pilot back in the day when we still provided that in Texas. But DIBELS now is in its 8th version, released about 2 years ago, and over 1 million children nationwide have been assessed with DIBELS this past year. For Spanish, everything is parallel to the English, and that's the EDEL assessment, also from the University of Oregon. Now, between the two, and along with a few measures that were described in that I'll describe in a moment, mCLASS covers all of the skills that you need for comprehensive reading development, as well as all the domains and measures that you need for dyslexia screening. So you're going to have in one place your universal screening, your progress monitoring, your kindergarten readiness assessment, and your dyslexia screener is all going to be in one place in mCLASS. Almost every single domain in mCLASS is teacher administered and digitally scored. There are a few small exceptions that we're not going to focus on today, but typically what it looks like is that you'll have a device. Most people use a touch screen, an iPad or a Chromebook with a touch screen, though some teachers and some educators and districts do use a laptop and a mouse. We don't recommend using a trackpad. People don't find that user experience works for them that well. So if you do have a laptop or even a desktop, just use a mouse along with that. From the child's side, most of the measures, they'll be reading letters or words or nonsense words. So they'll have in front of them printed materials. And your district will either download those from the University of Oregon's website or get printed bound copies from us. If you do remote assessment, I'll describe shortly how you actually can download that material for yourself to be able to show on a screen. But let's worry about the big ideas first. So the big idea in DIBELS is that it's a series of 1-minute measures. If you've ever done PRI or if you've ever done KIA, you've seen a similar kind of an idea. But if you're new to teacher-administered assessment, the idea is that each 1-minute measure, a child paces through a single foundational literacy skill. So in grades kindergarten, all 3 times a year in DIBELS 8, beginning of year, middle, and end of year, the child will be assessed in letter naming fluency. You put in front of them a page of letters, and they name them and see how far they can get and how many they get it correct in 1 minute. Phonemic segmentation, I'm going to describe to you and actually play you a video. A child hears a word and divides them into phonemes. Of course, many kindergartners, it might be more like they really identify the first sound, but that's okay. That's going to be part of the way it's all scored. And as you can see, as I move through the grades, if you do use mCLASS for Kinder 1 to N2, or even if you go all the way up to grade 6, each grade has appropriate measures for them, as well as progress monitoring measures. The same measures can be used for progress monitoring. In EDEL, for Spanish, it's a very similar sort of structure. Here, the measures go slightly differently at beginning, middle, and end of year, from grade to grade, K through 3. And then to these, Amplify has added well-researched, valid, and reliable measures that are going to be really useful to you in your kindergarten readiness, and then again, really critical in your dyslexia screening. And those are your spelling and vocabulary measures. They're available in both English and in Spanish, and for listening comprehension, again, in English and Spanish. So let's put that together about what that looks like in kindergarten. So we know that we're trying to have a holistic and multidimensional screener per the statute. In the case of mCLASS, for kindergarten, you'll have your emerging literacy reading and your language domains. Spelling for writing is going to start really at middle of year for kindergarten because it's a little bit challenging for beginning of year. As you can see here, for each of the skills that you would do, you have a measure in English and a measure in Spanish. So you have a lot of parallelism for students who are running in with challenges and struggling. We do have some optional inventory measures that could be useful. Now, again, I'm talking about this very high level. You don't have to memorize this. The online course is going to go through these measures and what you do at every grade level. What do you do at first, second, and beyond? So let's take a look at first how to assess, and then Karen is going to talk about how you read the reports. And as I go to do this, I don't have I don't know if we have any questions coming in, but please ask questions as we go along. And in the chat box, please share any of your thoughts about what's going to give you any kind of intriguing elements about how to assess. So the first thing to think about is that there are three main platforms or websites that you're going to use in addition, of course, to your PD platform. The first I'm going to do is how to administer the assessment. So you can see the URL here. Again, it'll be in your online course. The course also describes how to set this up once on your tablet. So that way you just have a shortcut that will actually work whether or not you're on Wi-Fi. In case your school building, might be a little spotty, you won't have a problem when you assess. That's what I'm going to show you in a moment. There's a second reporting platform, and then the third website that's really useful that I'll show you a little bit about is how to assess remotely. So with that, let's take a look. So right now, I'm in mCLASS amplify.com/assessment. And I've logged in as a Texas educator, Tanya Starr. Now we're going to take a look at this from within her practice class. So that way I could just show you how we would navigate to a child to assess. So here I am, I'm looking at Tanya's iPad or I'm looking at Tanya's laptop, and we're in her class. This is just a practice demo class. And I'm at my benchmark, let's say the beginning of the year. As I click on Anne, who's a kindergarten student, we find that I have a dashboard for beginning, middle, and end of year. It's all in front of me. Since it's the beginning of kindergarten, I could see my measures right down the left. And the dark blue box tells me what to assess next. So I'm going to do the letter names and the phonemic awareness first when I work with Anne. If she's really struggling, I do have an optional measure that allows me to see how she can isolate first sounds. But you'll notice that for letter sounds and word reading, which we do with beginning of year kindergartners, that's light blue. That's because a child who really is struggling with their phonemic awareness and their letter names, the research tells us that there's no need to assess them for their letter sounds and their word reading. We don't have to waste their time and frustration. Of course, you have the option. You know your students best. So you always have the option of overruling this kind of adaptivity and gating, and instead you can assess all of the measures if you like. If we were going to start with phonemic awareness, I'm going to show you a video, but the first thing that would come up is reminders. Now, again, in the online course, you've learned all the scoring rules, but some basic reminders of how to assess with fidelity will come up in your screen. And then as you go to instructions, Mr. Say will tell you exactly what to say to the child. So this is all you need to have in front of you. At this point, I'm going to switch over to a video and we'll watch, actually, it happens to be Karen filmed this video, assessing a first grader, Lee, with phonemic segmentation fluency. Now, as I'm doing this, please just add into the chat box, what you're thinking about. What do you find intriguing or interesting about this method of assessment? What are you most curious about? And of course, ask us questions as we go along.
Tell me the sounds in the...
So as I said, Mr. Say will give the instructions. I'm picking up in the video, which I will narrate and jump through a little bit, right after the instructions that were given to Lee. You can see there he's running a little skeptical of Karen, but he gets very engaged quickly with a practice item.
The word am. Tell me any sounds you hear. The sounds in the word am are Your turn. Tell me the sounds in the word am. Tell me any sounds you hear. Okay, here is your first word. 4.
Now, as you can see, Karen actually is working on a touchscreen on an iPad, and we've got her screen over here on the lower left. And as she says the word, he's going to divide it segment it into its phonemes. Again, even kindergartners do this, even though they are more likely to really just get the first phoneme. We still do it the same way, and we score it appropriately for kindergartners or first graders as needed. So let's watch a little bit, and then I'll map out the screen.
Here.
So here's a 1-minute timer counting up. It'll flash yellow before the end, and a 3-second hesitation. If the child does not have the answer in the 3 seconds, we just say go on. We don't want to penalize a child or get them too stuck on one. Now, he actually said ear. He did 3 phonemes. So she tapped underneath the correct answer, underneath the phoneme. Each time he said a phoneme, we'll see how she blends them later if there's a multi-phoneme word. And when he made a mistake on the ear, she tapped it once, turned red. A double tap would be a self-correct.
Who? Who? On. Wave. O. A. Both. Oh. Ball.
So let's move on a little bit further to near the end.
First. Bring.
You can see the blend there. So the assessment stops. Every child is curious. And
Job.
the first thing that Karen does is she indicates if she's done or if there was something wrong in the administration. Maybe it was really way too jumpy or there was a fire drill, she could invalidate it. Now remember, we're still doing in-person assessment. We'll do remote in a moment. And then as soon as this is finished, it gets scored instantaneously and shows up in the dashboard, the way I showed you before. With Lee, again, this is a first grader, so he's going to move through all the measures. Once he finishes the dark blue boxes, the light blue, oral reading fluency will unlock. When it's complete, his overall benchmark score will populate on the top. When we get to middle of the year, Karen will be able to see his beginning of year scores while she assesses. And this is very powerful because as soon as the assessment is over at middle of the year, they can actually have a conference, a one-on-one conference about how it's going and talk about the growth that's been made since the beginning of the year. And then, of course, the same thing at the end of the year. Now, let's say this were remote. So here you have a website that walks you through all of the guidance that we have for you on how to assess remotely, which might be really valuable and necessary for so many of us at the beginning of the year this year. It works the same way. You're just going to do a video screen like a GoToWebinar like we're doing today, a Zoom, a Google Hangouts, Skype, whatever you might use in your own school district. So we have a website that maps through everything that you need to know, how to think about DIBELS 8th edition under the circumstances, and then videos for every single one of the assessments on how to go about and do it. I'm going to play straight through a 5-minute video that walks you through how to administer DIBELS 8 remotely. And you'll see how similar it is to the way that we did it in person. Now, as you could see here on the screen before I start teeing this up, this is a method that's being done where you're working with the child on a video on one device, and Sarah, who's doing the assessment, she's actually working with her touchpad separately. This will work the exact same way, and you'll be able to see that in the video if she's got 2 windows. One where she's in the mCLASS assessment platform that I just showed you, and a different window on the same desktop where she's working with the child. So again, this is a PD video. You have access to all this for watching again later. And I'm going to encourage you to toss into the chat box, you know, what are you thinking about in terms of the possibility of remote assessment? What are your anxieties? What might give you confidence to be able to do this work?
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I work on the mCLASS team at Amplify. In this video, I'm going to show you how to assess students remotely using DIBELS 8th edition. Let's jump right in. In this video, I will demonstrate how to assess using 3 measures: phonemic segmentation fluency, nonsense word fluency, and oral reading fluency. Before you begin the assessment, take some time to connect individually with your student. The reading check is a great opportunity to spend a few minutes catching up with your student and seeing what's new in their lives. Let's start with PSF. PSF is captured orally, so there are no student materials needed. Teachers can simply go to their class list, choose a student, select PSF, and begin assessing the student. You will say a target word, and the student will say the sounds in that word. Here's an example of PSF being administered.
I'm going to say a word. After I say it, you tell me all the sounds in the word. So if I say the word mist, you would say, eh. If I say the word low, you would say, oh. Let's try one. Tell me the sounds you hear in the word am. Tell me any sounds you hear. Very good. The sounds in the word am are Okay, here is your first word. No.
Oh.
My.
Ah.
Say. Line.
Next, let's take a look at nonsense word fluency. During this portion of the assessment, your student will use the share screen feature to display materials on their screen. Here are the steps you need to take to make that happen. First, put the link to the student materials in your video conferencing tools chat box. Second, ask your student to click the link and scroll to the appropriate form. Third, ask your student to share their screen. Caregivers will need to help, especially when you're assessing young students. Explain to your student they should use their cursor to point to the words as they read. You will administer the practice items and then begin the NWF assessment.
When I say begin, read the words the best you can. Point to each letter and tell me the sound or read the whole word. So can you put your cursor under the first word? Yeah. Are you ready?
Oh wait, it's like covered. There we go. That's the first word, so say the first word.
Are you ready?
Grand, neck, long, writ, sim, fun.
Finally, we will take a look at oral reading fluency. Your student will use the share screen feature to display materials on the screen just as they did with nonsense word fluency, and then begin the assessment.
Please read this out loud. If you get stuck, I will tell you a word so you can keep reading. When I say stop, I may ask you to tell me about what you read, so do your best reading. Start here at the top. Ready?
Yes.
Okay, you may begin.
Our pond. I have a pond in my yard, and there are lots of fish in it. There are lights in the pond. They light up in the yard at night. My grandpa helped my dad build this pond many years ago.
Now you've seen our assessments delivered remotely. If you are administering other assessments remotely, be sure to scroll down on the page you're on and find our table with specific guidance for each assessment, such as TRC, Spanish language assessments, and mCLASS Math. That wraps up this video. Thank you so much for tuning in. We know these times require a lot of flexibility of you as an educator. Amplify is here to support you. We hope you find our guidance helpful as you prepare for upcoming assessments.
I hope that was really useful in kind of portraying the idea that remote assessment and in-person assessment really run pretty similarly. One of the things that's not in the video that I want to let you know about is at the end of each measure, you'll have an opportunity to mark off if the measure was administered in person or remotely, and this can help you and your district analyze the data later to be able, to see really what was going on with the students who were assessed one way or the other, and if there's any key differences. So let me just turn this back for Q&A. Scott, have we had any questions that are outstanding that we'd like to talk about in terms of how to assess before I turn it over to Karen?
There have not been any specific questions. A lot of folks have introduced themselves and shared their roles in their districts. So we have all of that documented, but y'all are doing a great job presenting it and everyone's getting it so far.
Okay, great. So I'm going to turn this over now to Karen. And again, please continue to share in the chat and in the questions, anything that you're thinking about, whatever gives you concern or pause, we're here to help.
Great. Thanks, Alan. And it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today. We are going to take a look at some of the reporting features. And before we do, just want to remind all of us, going back to what Natalie had said, that really the idea with the data is that it informs our planning so that we can close gaps that students may have in their skills. Oftentimes we find that we know it's effort to get the data in and to get the data collected, but we want to counter that effort with also using it so that we can put the data into action to really support our students. So returning to the data-driven instruction cycle, Alan showed you how we collect data with mCLASS. And then what I'd like to show you is how mCLASS helps you to analyze data and then also interpret that data so that you can be implementing instruction. Alan showed you the assessment aspects of mCLASS, and in a few moments I'll be jumping into the reporting. Very similar URL, just mclass.amplify.com. We know that your language in Texas is around on track, monitor, and needs support, and you have a color scheme of green, yellow, and red. With mCLASS, we have those same colors, green, yellow, and red, but we also have a blue, which is the above benchmark status as well. I'll be showing you in the reports the composite score and how that helps us to identify a student's overall reading proficiency, but also wanted to give you a chance here just to see the percentages and the numbers. So a student who is scoring above benchmark has a 90% or higher chance of meeting a goal at the grade level at the end of the year. If a student is green or at benchmark, they have 80% or higher chance of meeting that proficiency at end of the year. And then for yellow and red, you can see that those chances really decrease. And of course, those are the students that we are most concerned about and want to make sure that we intervene. So let me jump over to our platform. And you can see here that I am in a kindergarten class, and I'm at beginning of the year. And at the top of our reports here, you get a wonderful summary of exactly what's happening with your students. So I'm going to give you just a moment to take a look here. And if you like, you can put some comments, things that you notice that are in the chat. Okay, so I mentioned the composite score when we were looking at the graph. This is the best overall estimate of students' reading proficiency. And with the class summary here, I can very easily see what percentage and what number of my students are well below benchmark, below, at, and above. And we can see here in this kindergarten class, beginning of year, we have the majority of the class. This adds up to 86% of students who are either well below or below benchmark. So that gives me a good overall sense of where my students stand, but I can't really do anything from an instructional point of view until I look to the right. And here I see where are those foundational basic early literacy skills that my students are struggling with. And when we redesign these reports for DIBELS 8th edition, we really emphasize these skills. So you can see that the measure name, this is PSF that we saw demonstrated a few times. This is measuring phonemic awareness. And we wanted to make it super clear for teachers that this is the skill that the measure is an indicator of. So I can see that 43% of my students are below benchmark in phonemic awareness, and another 21% are well below. So that accounts for a lot of that concern that we have here and the risk that we see in the composite score. If I go further to the right, I can see that when it comes to letter sounds, which is the nonsense word fluency measure that we saw as well, we have a large number of students, 67%, which is 10 of our students, who are well below benchmark at the beginning of year for kindergarten when it comes to our letter sounds. So we know that we definitely want to do some work there. But interestingly, we can see here if we move over to decoding, which is reading the whole word, and then word reading, we have some students here who are at benchmark, and then we have a number of students who are below benchmark. So this tells me that there are some sight words here that students are coming in with, and that students are able to do some blending as well. So that's the top of the report, and sometimes we think of it as triaging. It really gives you a clear sense of where they are overall, and then as we move to the right, the specific skills that students need to work on. But we want to know even more, of course, we want to know which students are the ones that are struggling. So if we look down here, we have our class results table, and my students here are by default organized alphabetically, but I'm able to sort them. If I need to sort by composite score, I can also sort by any of the skills that are here over to the right. And again, we have this setup where the composite is on the left, and then we're building towards the more complex skills as we go to the right. So I have each of my students. I can see here that Andrea has an overall composite score of 301. I can see that that's below the goal of 306, but she's not too far beginning of year at kindergarten. I can see where she scored benchmark, which is PSF. So she's not one of those students who I'm concerned about when it comes to phonemic awareness. But I do see that she has below benchmark scores in letter sounds, decoding, and word reading fluency. So I can get a really good sense of what's happening with her here. Here's where those dyslexia screening measures will come in. The oral language and the spelling will appear here. And as Alan mentioned, we don't measure the spelling at beginning of year, which is why this is grayed out. So let me jump in, and I'm going to take a look here at, I want to take a look at a specific student. Here I'm going to jump in and look at Susan. She's well below overall, and then I can see that her greatest areas of need are letter naming fluency and then also letter sounds. So if I jump in here and I click on Susan's name, I'm going to first see her benchmark history. Now, if she were a 3rd or 4th grade student, I would have data all the way back, and I would be able to see her previous year's data, which can be really, really helpful for maybe a student who transfers in, or even just for a 1st or 2nd grade teacher to go back and take a look at students' data. It follows them year over year. And in this account, we also have MOI data, so we can see how the student progressed in each of the measures, as well as in the composite score. But what I'm actually more interested in here is with progress, because we have incredible graphs that you can use to see how students are progressing. So here I have Susan's beginning of year PSF score, and we can see that she was below benchmark. And then we can see that as the teacher worked and she learned, she's moving up and up and up, and she's into the green zone here. We can then see again that as the MOI benchmark came in, she didn't quite meet that benchmark. That's going to be higher, obviously. The goal is 29 at middle of year, but she made great progress. And by the end of the year, where she needs to be at 44, this teacher knows what it is that she can do to help Susan progress. So if I look down here, I can see all of the progress monitoring forms that she was given. I can even jump in here and click on it and be able to see all of the results that were recorded on the device. So what you saw in both of the videos, everything gets recorded here, and it's easy to pick up on patterns and see how she's doing. We can see she didn't get too far, only 6 segments in that minute. But then if I want to compare that with her more recent score of the MOI, I can click on here and that will come up and I can see how she did at MOI. So lots of really specific data here for the teacher. But we also recognize that you have a lot of students and you may not have time to go in and do all of the analysis on your own. So there's a couple things that we have to help you. For under the progress here, you can easily see, you can easily see the progress of all of your students. So here's Andrea. We can see the BOY composite. We can see how she scored on each of the different skills. We can see the most recent progress monitoring scores, where she is in relation to the MOI goal. And then this is my favorite part, which is the aim line. So this is what we saw in the graph, but in a miniature form, how she's tracking according to the aim line. And we can see here that in letter sounds, she's above the aim line, but that in decoding, these scores are below where she needs to be in order to get to that goal. So even though you can go in and look at each student, you also have a lot of information available to you right here. And I also just want to point out, Alan talked about the gating rules. If a student does not do well on PSF at kindergarten, they don't have to go on and do the more difficult skills, but they will still get a composite score. As the teacher, if you want to, you can absolutely override that, and you could, I could have given Roberto the NWF measure, but mCLASS also gives you the opportunity to draw on the research that shows that most students who score a 0 in PSF will not do well when it comes to NWF, but we still will give them a score. So that's what it looks like here if the student did not go on to do those measures. So that is progress, but I think where things really get interesting, and as a former teacher, I certainly appreciate, is when we look at instruction. So mCLASS does an incredible job of taking all of the detail that you're collecting with your device and helping to put it together for you. So under the instruction tab, there is first groups, and all of your students will be grouped into like groups with other students that have similar needs. And we can see here we have 3 students. That's Roberto, who we saw had the 0 in PSF. And so normally we'll see a statement here about what they can do. So this is saying they have limited phonemic awareness. Here you can see the students in the next group can segment some word parts. Then it'll clearly show you what the students need to work on. And then if you click here, there are a whole number of activities that you can use with your students. Now here there's 6 different pages of activities. You can download all of them if you want to. You can also sort them. So if I wanted to see just the activities that address segments words with 2 phonemes, then I could click on that, and then just these would be available. And these are very teacher friendly. They give you clear steps as to what to do. They're great for small groups. And again, there's prepare, there's a warm up, very, very clear guidance as to how to lead students through, and then in addition, how to support students who are having difficulty, how to challenge students who are doing really well. So a lot of support there for you. We also have considerations for students who are ELL and a little bit of additional information for the teacher. And then this is a very important piece. We have cheers when we share this with teachers. Whenever you progress monitor students or after the benchmark, when you click this button, update recommendations, it's going to modify the groups accordingly. So if Roberto was getting instruction in phonemic awareness and he was doing really well, he may be moved to the next group as a result of clicking the update recommendations button. So it's really dynamic, really supportive for you. I also just want to show you that if you're interested in looking at instructional suggestions by student, you can do that as well with the Students tab. Again, here's Roberto, who we were looking at, and again, you can see the patterns that were pulled out of his PSS probe, and then all of these activities that are available specifically for him. I can go, I can see his group here as well. And then for those of you who are interested in all of the activities and maybe pulling these in a different way, we make that available as well by skill name and then also by grade level. And the last thing I want to show is that we have made it very easy for you to communicate these results with parents. Under Home Connect, you can choose to generate letters for the whole class or for individual students, and you can do that both in English and you can also do it in Spanish. You can simply click download PDF, and then that will be downloaded for you. And here we have a look at our student Susan, and we can see in very parent-friendly language the scores and the performance level key here. It's giving parents information about how their students scored in the different basic early literacy skills. And I think most importantly, it's explaining where they need support and giving suggestions for activities that they can do at home that don't require a lot of materials, but really give them specific suggestions and help them to partner. This is what it looks like for the DIBELS results in Spanish as well, so that for Spanish-speaking parents. And then we also have a website here, which is on all of the Home Connect letters, which links to a portal that has even more activities. So lots of resources that are there. If you're screening in our Spanish language screener, EDEL, then there is a letter that will share those results. So before I jump out of recording, Scott, do we have any questions? I know that was a lot of information.
Yeah, there have been a handful of questions that popped up. Alan has been able to answer them as we've been going along, so we are totally caught up right now.
Okay, fantastic. Alan, anything that you want to share with the group on the questions?
Yes, I'll just share one. We got some questions about having Spanish lessons, and the answer to that one is that we are focusing today on walking you through the English version of the platform, EDEL, which is all the Spanish assessments. That has Spanish lessons included in it as well. It looks a little different than the platform Karen's showing us, but it's the same gist. The online PD course that your district will give you the link to will cover both English and Spanish in depth.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Great.
And of course, those letters are English and Spanish for the English measures and English and Spanish for the Spanish measures. So whatever you need, right, you've got it. Thanks, Karen.
Mm-hmm. Sure, sure. Okay. So I did also just want to take a few minutes to make sure you were aware that mCLASS can also be used to fulfill the dyslexia screener requirements. They're listed here, and for each of these different domains, we also have measures that you can use. Here's a breakdown of how those line up. And this is similar to the chart that Alan showed earlier for kinder at end of year when you need to be reporting the dyslexia code. We have you covered in terms of the English measures listed here that will be part of DIBELS, or the Spanish measures that are listed here that are part of EDEL. And then for the spelling in either language and the listening comprehension, which will show up as oral language, either in English or in Spanish, those are added on for kindergarten end of year. And then the same with first grade, we have all of the measures that you need in order to fulfill these requirements. And as Alan mentioned, the scoring rules and practice opportunities, all of those are included in the online module. So and you'll have access to that for the full academic year. So if the beginning of the year feels crazy and you don't have time to learn about oral language now, no worries, you can come back to the course, to those online modules when it gets closer to your EOY window, and you can learn about the spelling and the oral language then. Questions? What can we answer, either about the dyslexia screenings or about mCLASS in general?
I'm going to answer one that just came up. Greta asked a question that I think many people might have. It's actually come up a couple of times. Is there a measure for reading level and comprehension? So the core part of mCLASS is exactly what you've seen. For grades 2 and above, there is a basic comprehension, which is sentence and paragraph level. However, what I think people are asking about is really running records. We do offer an optional measure that districts can purchase and add on to their mCLASS package. It's called TRC, or Text Reading and Comprehension. And in that one, children read real books, teachers score on their device, same idea as what I showed you earlier, but a full-on running record, and then has comprehension questions. And then that produces a reading level, an FMP A to Z level, as well as crosswalks to Lexiles and DRA levels. So again, that's an optional add-on. If you do want it, check in with Ray. But mCLASS itself provides the at, above, below, and well below levels. All right, I think that covers it, Karen. I don't see any other questions coming in.
Terrific. Okay, so I think we're going to send it back to Natalie.
Thank you, guys. All right, Scott, can you get my screen back up? Let's see. Wonder, can you guys see that okay? Let's see, show my screen.
It should be up now.
Okay, wonderful. All right, well, thank you guys so much for showing us, the ins and outs of mCLASS. I do want to kind of go back just for a little bit. I know Karen reviewed some of the reports with you, which are all really incredible. And we just wanted to add a little bit about best practices surrounding some data sharing. So now that we've explored the many ways to collect all this very meaningful data through mCLASS, let's take a look at some best practices when it comes to how to communicate this effectively with families. So while collecting, analyzing, interpreting, and implementing are important parts of the data cycle, it's also vital that we share our findings. As previously mentioned in my CBC card game example, if we can think back to when I did that, showing the child the IP word family and things like that, many of us can move through the data cycle quite quickly and may not take the time to actually document or record our findings. So it's important to consider which other people in our students' lives might benefit from receiving this important data, especially from literacy screeners. Sharing student data is a lot like recipe sharing. Data is information that lists exactly what each student needs to be successful. It holds the ingredients, measurements, and instructions on how to support each student. Therefore, it's important that we share our data or recipes for success with people who are of most importance to each student, such as families, administrators, and other support staff. So for a moment, consider yourself like a seasoned chef. How often would you need to write down what you're doing? Or how often would you look for directions? So much of what you would do after the while in the kitchen as a chef is instinctual. So the same thing happens in the classroom as well. After a while, the way we work with children and use data to drive instruction becomes an internalized habit. But not all people that children meet in their early years will know what we know about them. Those people may not have all those recipes for success in working with that child. So it's important to keep in mind that we share what we find. For example, what you observed in the screener results, or what you did about a particular observation you noticed in the classroom. So data sharing isn't just about student success, it's also about telling the story of a whole person. And assessments are certainly a part of that big storytelling regarding a student's growth in your classroom. So keep that in mind as you're sharing these reports with families, the ones that you populate out of mCLASS, thinking about some other things that you might also want to share with families as well. And we also have to remember that communicating with families is a two-way street. As educators, it's important to remember that while we may be the experts in early childhood education, we're certainly not the experts in each individual child's life. In fact, it's a part of our professional standards to respect the experts that currently exist in children's lives, which are parents, caregivers, and other family members. Again, we're reminded of our professional standards from NAEYC, which state teachers learn with and from families, recognizing and drawing on families' expertise about their children for insight into curriculum, program development, and assessment. So you may have this practice already. When I was teaching, I would send home reports populated from my assessment tools, such as mCLASS, but I'd also send over something else too, maybe a little added piece of information about just who the child is in my classroom so far. And I often use this acronym to sort of help me guide what to communicate with families and how to communicate it. So when we're communicating, it's always best to be friends. We can be the following as much as possible when we're writing or communicating with families in any way. We should always remember to be friendly, realistic, inquiring, empathetic, negotiable, dependable, and supportive. So it's important to remember to use a friendly tone, set realistic expectations for you, the family, and the child. Use your inquiry skills to remain curious, not judgmental, regarding what the family knows about their child. Remain empathetic to their needs. Be negotiable when discussing expectations. Use a dependable form of communication that works for the both of you. Certainly now that we may be communicating with families remotely. And be supportive of all families and children. And so this might come very naturally to you, but it's been my experience in the past that sometimes things like this, just by using a simple acronym to kind of check your communication, can be really helpful. So this is just a little activity that I created that I gave to my teachers while they were still in service at times. And we can practice how to use the FRIENDS acronym here. And since this video is going to be available for viewing later, this is a great time, if you are viewing it later, to pause and kind of give yourself a moment to check to see which one of these letters or forms of communication used the FRIENDS acronym. And, you could take a couple of seconds to read it and just kind of check out which one of these used more strength-based language and which one didn't. So as you can probably see, one of these is far more strength-based than the other. And it's made very obvious for you here that the one on the left is not using any kind of strength-based language or friends-based language using that acronym. And the one on the right is. But what's interesting to pull away from this very obvious example is the fact that they essentially gave the same amount of information, but they were said in very different ways. So I think while this example provides explicit differences between the two communication styles, what's important to understand is how we'd like to communicate with families to begin new partnerships. Always remember to put yourself in the perspective of a family member who would be receiving this communication too, and consider which language would appeal more to you while you're encouraging those partnerships, especially since we're going to be, many of us will be starting the school year remotely. Our first, our expectations of parents and how we come off to them matters a whole lot. All right, so we're nearing the end here. We are going to review some quick resources for you all, and then we will end the presentation. We do want to remind you that we have a new data-driven instruction in early childhood education website. This is where you'll go to find all of your requirements regarding pre-K to second grade assessments. We also have a very helpful tool selection guide, which can help you decide on what tool is really going to be best for you, or perhaps you're joining us as a literacy coach looking at the variety of tools available for pre-K through second grade. And we also have the best practices and professional development section. So this is where this video will be housed, along with many others that are coming up in the fall. And I do want to let you guys know what those are. We are developing at TEA some pretty short 20 to 30 minute videos around data-driven instruction and best practices. And essentially, instead of giving you one big long webinar on them, we're chunking them up into smaller pieces. So one of the first ones that are going to come out are defining and understanding terminology. We know that words such as benchmarks are really different in kindergarten and first grade than they are in third grade. So we just want to be clear about language and how it gets used throughout the series. We're going to spend a lot of time on my favorite part, which is collecting and organizing your data. So what happens when you have data outside of mCLASS? What do you do with it? And where do you store those sticky notes so that you can find them later? We'll also have a video on analyzing data, as well as implementing and planning data-driven instruction, which is really looking at what data you have and pushing it into your instruction so that you are individualizing your instruction for each child. We'll also have some best practices coming up around reports. So this means understanding and communicating reports, using data-driven response to interventions. And we'll also have some videos coming up on home to school connections. And this one is just one of them that's popping up. That is one of my favorites, which is understanding children's home knowledge. So we know that sometimes moving the barrier from home to school connection can be a little bit difficult. And we just want to make sure that you feel supported, especially as children might be spending a little bit more time at home this fall than they would be in any other year. So I just wanted to let you guys know that, thank you very much, mCLASS, for partnering with us in this. mCLASS does have quite a robust series of videos on their website, as well as really impressive learning modules. So I highly recommend that you guys check that out. And we'd also like to thank our State Director for Early Childhood, Jackie Porter. This is absolutely part of her vision in creating this endeavor, as well as Mary Allen, who helped develop these PowerPoint slides, and Scott, who helped us navigate the whole way through. Thank you again so much. If you all have any questions whatsoever, please do not be hesitant to email us at earlychildhoodeducation@tea.texas.gov. And it says include topic name, text key, a literacy screener. So sorry, that was supposed to say mCLASS literacy screener, but either way, whatever subject line you decide on, we are there to support you. And we're going to stick around to ask a few more questions. If any pop up at the end, we can hold an office hours for a few minutes until 10:30 or so. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. Scott, have any questions? Oh, yeah, sorry.
I was going to say is that Alan wanted to share a little bit of additional information about the training modules that are available.
Oh, perfect. Alan, go ahead. Yes.
The main thing that I wanted to share with everybody is, again, we've had a few questions about Spanish. We've stayed focused on the English just because of the high-level overview. I would like to just let everybody know that Spanish looks different, but it works basically the same way, measure by measure. You'll have benchmark reports that are very similar, color-coded, sortable, and you'll also have lessons in Spanish. All of this is covered in the online PD course. So again, as we explained a little bit earlier, as soon as your district fully implements and starts enrolling, you'll get a link to the online course. You create your own login for that course. It's a good idea if you have your own mCLASS login ready. When you take that course, you'll be able to do all the practices in your own account, but it's not 100% required. So good luck.